Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Men's Forged group, Jordan. I have Pastor Jordan with me. Our worship pastor is joining us for this session. Be looking at two qualities as we're going through, and we're getting close to the end here, but we have about 5 left. And 2 tonight is a leader needs to be loving and needs to set a good example. You might also put that under good testimony. We're going to park the good testimony because there's a lot to say about that and start with the loving. Now, we actually have been going through 1 Corinthians chapter 13 on Sunday mornings. I just finished the third part of a 3-part series this morning on the art of loving. If you haven't had a chance to watch that, I would encourage you to do so on our YouTube or Facebook page. You can also see it on sermon audio or listen to it on sermon audio. And so today, we're going to deal with loving as it correlates to leadership specifically. You know, Jordan, I have realized as a leader that one of the most effective tools as a leader that I have to influence people is love. It's not truth. Now, you'd like it to believe that people would only follow leaders who follow truth, but that's not the case. The world is full of people who will follow a leader who's running from truth, who has no clue what truth is. But they will follow these leaders because they feel loved by these leaders. Now, of course, another one is if the leader can, help you find financial success or make you feel good about yourself. There's other reasons why someone would follow a leader, but I think one of the most common reasons people follow leaders, and we're not talking in the workplace where you're paid to do so, but voluntarily, out of choice, you're going to follow someone because you believe they love you or they're just a loving person. Have you found that to be the case in your life? I'm sure you've followed leaders before that you don't think are loving. Have you noticed a difference in the influence the leadership has in your life, the ones you follow that are not loving versus the ones you follow that are loving? Which one influences and has influenced you more?
Yeah, well, with my personality, I follow, I can follow anyone. It's how I want them to, it's allowing them to impact me. So let me put it this way. If someone isn't out to love me, to guide me and actually lead me to truth and things like that, I'll just lead you just so I'm being submissive to leadership or
Sure,
whatever.
Sure.
But if I see that you truly, genuinely love me and others and you want me to succeed spiritually or whatever it is, you're easier for me to follow. And I've experienced both, but again, I think you're talking about how people just follow those that love. Well, I mean, in the world's eyes, the way that they feel loved is they just feel accepted who they are, and
yes,
they feel normal, like what who they are is just normal, and there's really no progress. It's just like a big group hug almost,
right?
But
we're going to talk about that kind of love versus the love a leader should have,
right?
Yeah. My point is though, you followed both.
Oh yeah.
You can learn from both. Which of the two has more influence on you? The one that loves you or the one that
loves
doesn't?
Me, of course. The one that loves me, that has my interest before their own.
Sure. So I am not saying that you'll only follow people that love you. I am saying there are some that will. Mm-hmm. There are people that will not follow anyone voluntarily unless they're loved by that person. But if you're the kind of man that says, look, I'm going to follow a guy because I respect him, I'm going to follow him because he does stand on truth or because she stands on truth, I'll follow them for that reason. I'm telling you now that their influence in your life will not be as effective if they don't love you. So as leaders, we need to remember that. Look, your kids. Your kids are going to follow you right now because they have no choice. You got young. Your oldest Michael is what, 3, 4?
3.5.
He's not very old. So Michael's going to follow you because he has to. And he might even respect you because you're his dad. He might see the choices you make, and he might respect your choices. But if you want to influence Michael, you can't just love Michael. Michael needs to feel and know that you love him. And then you will have strong influence in his life.
Right.
This is where a lot of dads drop the ball big time. They say, well, my children, they know I love them. They know I care about them. And I provide all these things. No, they don't. Look, kids are naturally selfish, and kids are naturally going to think, I deserve clothes. I deserve nice clothes. I deserve a nice house. I deserve to go to my friend's house. You doing all these things for them, they think they deserve it. You're not actually proving your love to them because in their selfish head, they think it's part of being your child. So you need to have conversations. You need to learn their love language and communicate love in a way where they feel loved. Because if children don't feel loved by parents, your influence level will drop drastically. And they will probably find love from someone else. I don't mean romantic love. I mean acceptance, love, in whatever way they describe it. And whoever they do feel loved by will have more influence in their life. Have you noticed with children that they love their coaches, football, especially young children, football coach, basketball coach, baseball coach, and parents are like, how can that football coach get these kids to run for half an hour, 45 minutes straight? Some kids, it's the love of the game. Most of them, it's just an undying, unconditional love for their coach. And whatever reason, the mind of kids, there's this natural phenomenon where they want to be loved and to love their sports coach. And I'm sure there's some selfish reasons. They want more playing time or whatever else. But their love for their coach and their belief their coach loves them, that coach could almost ask anything of a child, even a teenager, and they're going to do it without question.
Right.
Heavy influence on the lives of children by teachers, coaches, mentors, because those kids feel loved by these people.
I agree. I think when I was younger, obviously, foolishly, I followed personality. I think that was a big thing for me when it came to leadership. It wasn't, I felt like if I could bond with this person's personality, that I felt loved almost. You know, very, very strange, thinking. That's how I felt love, was by bonding with their personality, or I felt something when I was around them. Their personality was energetic or something.
You make
like
an
that.
interesting point. So here's a great, I like what you brought up. Even the perception of love,
right?
Even the misperception of love is enough to be influenced by this person. If a child thinks the teacher loves them and the teacher doesn't really love them, it doesn't matter what the truth is. If the child misperceives to be loved by them, that teacher still has influence. So part of this problem is if the child's definition of love is wrong, it doesn't change anything. The ability for someone to influence a child is still strong, even if the child doesn't understand what real love is. In their own head, if they've come up with their own idea of what love is, this big group hug thing that you talked about earlier, whoever gives them that big group hug will have a high opportunity of influence in their life.
I agree.
So as leaders, especially with children, we must first teach them what love is so they know how to perceive it and the kind of people they should be loved by. And then as dads, recognize this. If you put your children on a team, sports team or otherwise, and you say, oh, no big deal, it's not going to affect them greatly, and your child doesn't understand what true biblical love is, if they don't understand the boundaries of appropriate love, if they don't understand and perceive how love should be communicated, and they think their coach loves them, that coach probably has more ability to influence your child than even you as a dad.
I think coaches, too, you mentioned love language, kind of have the advantage when it comes to that as well, because they obviously have an interest in sports. So you are tugging on a love language of that child, and that you're kind of set up for success if the love of the game brings you all together. And
very true.
And so I think that is, I don't know. I think it would be number one to learn your child's love language, because you can provide for them. You could even spend time with them and them not feel loved. It could be giving them something that they've wanted, and maybe deserved, or give them a physical touch could be one that makes them feel loved. I think that's really, and that's something I'm learning about Michael now, is learning his love language. And I think I know his. I think his is acts of service, where I do things for him to show him that I love him. As me saying I love you, he'll say I love you back. But when I do things for him or with him, those two things really light him up. I could tell that speaks to him directly, that he knows that Dad loves him when I do those things.
Amen. It's not just children, though. If you are a leader and you want to do more than just lead people to truth, if you want to influence their life, you following truth is not enough. You can't say, well, I'm heading towards truth and the real men will follow me and the wimps will be left behind. That may be true. The real men may follow you, and the wimps may be left behind, however you define those two terms. But if you want to actually influence people's lives, you must love them. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we saw a good portion of the chapter this morning. Let's go back to verses 1, 2, and 3. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass or tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. As a leader, you could be the smartest, the brightest, the nicest, the richest. You could literally have a vision of what the future should be and kind of have prophecy. You could be the best speaker. Accomplish nothing of value if you do not have love. Love is a priority for God's children, and especially a priority for a child of God who seeks to be a leader of God's children. Whether young, teen, or adult, it does not matter. We must have and display love.
It also seems that these are talking about not actually acting on love. It actually talks about the long term of love. I mean, for instance, suffereth long, is kind, envies not, vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. That's a long term reputation.
Well, love does say love never fails.
Right. And so it's
verse 8.
Right. So it's almost like it's not these simple acts of love or you do certain things. See, I love you. It's the long. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
I'm trying to
No,
put
I do.
into
So
words.
here's the thing about leadership. If you're in someone's life for 3 months, don't expect to have much influence.
Right.
But, a coach who's been the coach for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you will have influence on a new player because they know you've been around for 20 years. Even though they're only 8 years old, they've been told, like, you're a legend in their mind, right? A youth pastor who's been at the same church for 5, 10, 15 years. A kid who enters into that youth group immediately will be influenced by that youth pastor, not because that youth pastor has been in this boy's or girl's life for 10 to 15 years, but has been around for 10 to 15 years. They have proven to those who know them and those who know of him or her that they are committed to love.
Right. Love is a long game. It's not a lap.
A long game. And yet how many leaders are constantly hopping from one role to the next? Whether it's a church and the pastor is leaving a church after 2 to 3 years, the youth pastor, children's pastor can only handle, a handful of years before they got to reset somewhere else. Made too many mistakes, got bored, got upset, whatever. It wasn't the long game. I mean, they're not going to really have heavy influence if they're only at a place for a couple of years.
Right.
And yet that according to multiple polls I've read over the years, the average length of a youth pastor's ministry is about 2 years, if that, or less.
Right. Yep. And it shows it really, and then that, because let's say you come to a church, you come at the same time that pastor does. That pastor says, "I love you all," does things for them, and then leaves in 2 years.
Yeah.
Because they're not,
It's almost insulting.
Yeah,
it's almost like you were just playing us.
Like, did you
Right.
really?
Right.
But switch roles. If a member leaves, you're still there. Chances are they're going to probably come back because you're there. They know that you
sometimes,
love them.
yes, sometimes.
Yeah,
no.
right.
There's
right.
good reasons for people to
right.
move on. Not
right.
always.
But what I'm saying is that your long-term love has greater impact than the short-term does. That makes sense what I'm saying?
It does. Yes.
I'm having a hard time putting it into words.
And so let's talk about other than just church. When it comes to marriages, when it comes to your children, think the long game. Pace yourself. Recognize that the healthiest relationships are not those who shoot to level 10 over 2 weeks and you found love. No. Can you maintain a commitment over 20 years? Not a high of 2 weeks. It cracks me up. I've been married over 15 years, and teenagers who think they found love because they fell in love by someone they just met 2 days ago, they don't have a clue. Because love is not an immediate high. Love is a long-term commitment, as you're saying, and I agree. And over time, when you've shown that long-term commitment to your spouse, to your children, your influence will grow, which, by the way, is why a lot of young children, the influence isn't really strong until they become adults, 18, 19, 21, 22. And if the dad is still in their life, that's when the kid looks back and say, you know what, Dad? We haven't agreed on a lot of things. We've disagreed, but I'm 22, and you're still in my life. You still love me. And now I'm actually coming to you for advice at 22, when at 12, I was running from your advice because it required longer for some kids to see the commitment you had to your children.
Love cannot be, it cannot have, you can't put conditions on love. You can't say, well, if you do this, then I'm going to just stop.
Well, that's
loving.
not biblical love.
That's not love.
Conditional love is not God's love,
Right.
and biblical love is an illustration of God's love.
Right.
So do not redefine love so that it matches your personality. Redefine your actions to match God's love. Now, the truth is, men, you are who you are. The personality God created with you, that's who you are. Extrovert, introvert. You're an artist by heart. You're a mathematician by heart. You know, two extremes. The artist is everything is objective and, you know, do whatever you want. And the mathematician is no, there's black and white, right? God created you the way you are. Don't let your personality control or define love. Let love define and control your personality. And if you do that, you will have a strong influence on the people God has brought into your life. Do not think that just because you're a good man that follows truth, people will be influenced by you. All right, let's go to the next one, and that is a good example. So we're in 1 Peter now, and chapter 5, verse 3. Yeah, this is a lost art, by the way. A lot of leaders, and I'm going to go to pastors again because I am one, so I don't personally feel guilty talking about pastors. I know a lot do, and they don't want to speak ill of pastors, and I can appreciate that as a pastor, but I am one, so I'll say it like it is. A lot of pastors think that their position pretty much allows any choice they make, and you cannot question who they are, what they've done, or where they're going because of their role. It's not just pastors, though, is it? A lot of men think that as fathers and husbands. A lot of men think that in the workplace. Look, I'm the boss. What I say goes. You don't like it? There's the door. Like, I don't need to explain myself to you. Well, you can lead like that. You're probably not going to influence very many people with that kind of leadership. And the people that follow you will not be following you because they necessarily, highly respect or love you. There's probably something they're getting out of what your leadership is offering, whether it's financial or otherwise. They're probably selfish in their reasons to follow you if that's the kind of leader you are. Do not be that kind of leader in your marriage, with your kids, at church, at the workplace. It's not about my position allows me to do whatever I want and you can't confront me. No, a good leader recognizes that a good leader is first someone that can be respected, not because they deserve it by their position, but because they earned it. A good leader earns respect, does not demand it because of a title that was given to them. In 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 3, we're told, neither is being lords over God's heritage or church, but being examples to the flock. So we have a comparison contrast here in that verse. The first kind is, I'm in charge, my way or the highway. If you don't like it, get out of here. That's the first type of leader. God says, don't be that kind of leader. Instead, be an example. Lead by example. Show them what you're trying to point them towards. Don't be a leader who misrepresents Christ and says, be like Christ. Be like Paul, where he says, hey, you want to be like Christ? You can see Christ through me. Follow me as I follow Christ. Paul was not saying he was God. He was saying, I reflect God. And if you follow my reflection, then you're just going to see Christ and follow him as well. A good leader recognizes the value of a strong testimony. There was a man recently that my wife and I, a godly man, I'm not going to tell you who because some of you might know him. He doesn't live in this area. He's nationally known, though. He's coming to the end of his ministry, and my wife and I were discussing him, and she said, when I was young, a lot of people really liked his preaching. She said, I was never really heavily influenced by him. His preaching style wasn't mine. But a lot of people really love this guy. And I said, honey, the guy's retired now. He's out of the ministry. I said, his preaching style you may or not have liked, but I'll say this about the guy. He went his entire life in ministry, and his testimony was never shattered. He never was accused of anything that I know of, and if he was, it never stuck. And I said, that alone deserves high praise, high respect for a man who's gone his whole life in this world, in today's world, and not rolled in the mud with the pigs to the point where it destroyed his testimony. Because we are finding more and more men who we thought highly of, only to discover they were lying to us. And for a good portion of their ministry, they were playing two games. And both of them were games. Even the ministry was a game to them. It's obvious. I think of Ravi Zacharias as being the most recent, and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but we need to learn from his lesson. If you don't know the story of Ravi Zacharias, you might be wise to study it tonight. The man was one of the most respected apologetic theologians this side of heaven in today's age. Didn't matter what part of the world you were from, most people, if they're Christian, knew about Ravi Zacharias. Only to discover after his death that the man had been abusing women, using women, participating in multiple affairs, lying and deceiving to his staff, and it's possible there's even some financial embezzlement going on, and he was doing that the entire time that he was preaching an apologetic-based gospel of this is right and you do what's right. The world is wrong, the Bible is right. He's teaching and preaching this while living the opposite. And it shattered a lot of people's belief system. And Ravi Zacharias did not represent well 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 3.
And examples are not for us to build our faith upon.
Of course not. It's
someone that we can look as an example for. But we have to look at that as they're as much clay as we are. They are much as dirt as we are. They're as much of a sinner as we are. So anything good comes from God. And anything good in that person's life should be an example not of their goodness, but of God's graciousness on them. And, one of the things that, before I came here, one of the things that I was challenged to do for my pastor in West Virginia, he showed me 1 Timothy 4, verse 12. He said, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers." He said, you're not going to go and correct everyone around you and tell them how to live. You be an example of how to live. Because youth, sometimes you haven't really established yourself. And so you're not to go and tell everyone else how to live necessarily. Teach the Bible, of course, but more importantly, be an example of what the scriptures say. And that example could also be when you mess up, that could also be an example. I think that we should be a godly example, but when we mess up, we should be an example of God's forgiveness and even repentance as well.
A lot of people, and you nailed it, a lot of people think that the godly example is me living the perfect outwardly looking Christian life. And if I look like I'm an angel of God given to mankind, then I'm the example of Christ. There is so much more to be an example than just doing what looks like all the right things. Because the truth is, no one can attain that, first of all. But the example is not so much what you do, the do's and don'ts, it's who you are as a person. You are humble. You are loving. We've talked about love and humility here. You are a follower of Christ. So throw out of your head that, well, I'm a good dad because I show my son that I'm a hard worker, and I show my son that I provide for my family, and I show my son that I go to church every Sunday. You're just basically checking off 10 things every man should be, and I'm these 10 things, and my son will turn out okay. A good example is also to show your son when you fall what that looks like getting back up. A good example is also showing your son and daughter that when God breaks your heart, what it looks like to be mended. A good example is also showing that life is not about you, but about Christ first and others second. So too many leaders would say, I am a good example. I got a tie, I got a coat, 3-piece suit, vest, pocket kerchief, whatever. I'm a good example. Look how I look. Well, honestly, I feel like that's one of the least valuable assets of a leader is how they look. I care about who they are. And so do most children, teenagers, and almost anyone outside of a ministry where clothes and dress has been elevated to a level 10 of this is the most important thing about a Christian. Most other people recognize that's not true. And most other people are looking for a heart condition.
And I think teenagers can see right through that, too.
I know they can.
I think that many people can. I especially think that teenagers can see just I don't actually think that they care about exactly what you look like. I think it's how you love them, how you treat them, I honestly think that they are more observant than we think they are. That's a challenge for us. Our children are more observant. I'm learning this with Mike. I'm thinking of funny things that he's done, but nothing wrong, but just little things that I would do that he will repeat. And it actually is humbling. It really is, because it puts me in check. Luckily it's nothing major. It's just little things. But that's what they do, and that's what the example is there for. Again, the only good comes from God. That's in our life comes from God. That's a reputation on Him. What comes from us really are these acts of repentance and change. That's what they look for. If you stay comfortable in your flaws and never change, that's an example, but that's the wrong example. So I guess we could say that everyone is an example.
It's true. Everyone is.
And so
what kind of
example do we want to be? And I really what I desire is, I want my son to see me, like my whole self, my heart. When I need to repent or be forgiven, I want him to see that. I want him to see it's okay to ask for forgiveness, whether it's from God or from mom or whoever. I want that to be seen, and genuinely, not just a show, because that can be a show as well, So yeah, that's what I would say.
We're going to end with this final thought. When it comes to leadership, you are building a group. You're building a team. You're building, some call it a following. I'd prefer the phrase team, because it's not a bunch of people following me everywhere, but a team of us working together. So let's say you're building a team. The kind of leader you are will determine the culture of that team. Do you ever remember when you were young and you joined the team for the first time, and right away, like, everyone was open, everyone was honest, everyone was hardworking, everyone was kind to each other? I'll tell you how that happened. It was the leadership, the coach, the assistant coach. They created that dynamic through their example, through their expectations. You ever had the unfortunate experience of joining a team or a job, so a workplace team, where it was the opposite? Backbiting, deception, lies. I'll tell you what happened. The leadership, by their example, created or allowed that type of team. See, because it's been said, everything rises and falls with leadership, ultimately with the leadership of Christ. But if Christ is not the cornerstone of your leadership, then you are going to be the one that everything rises and falls with. What kind of culture does your example create for your team? Are you creating a culture of emotional, spiritual, physical success? Or are you creating a culture of doubt, anger, discouragement, bitterness, backbiting? Your example is going to make or break that team. I have discovered that most of the world is looking for a leader to follow. Even other leaders are looking for leaders to follow. Most of the world is looking for a leader to follow. So there's no end of people who are looking for someone to follow. And I found that even in churches, that if people aren't drawn to your example, your style of leadership, they're just going to go somewhere else. Now, I have decided as a leader, I am not going to lead this church based off of the individuals and what they want. I am going to lead based off of Christ and what He wants, and whoever's drawn to that culture will come here. And if the way I do things and the way I lead doesn't work for you, they're going to go to a church that they do appreciate that style of leadership. I'm not going to concern myself with the people who don't click, don't connect with the culture that has been created here, because I'm confident God will bring them somewhere else where they can connect. As a leader, I'm going to focus on my example of Christ and the way that I believe God has called me, and allow people to be drawn to that example and to that culture. Any final thoughts, Jordan?
You said it.
Okay. Well, we're going to end there tonight. We'll not have our men's group next Sunday night. We have a wedding here Sunday night, so we will be back afterwards. So I hope you guys enjoy your week, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.